Hi and welcome to this demonstration. This one is a bit different from my other videos as it is specifically designed to help you make the transition from the tight style to the loose style. Okay, those keen-eyed of you will notice that I'm not working from a photograph. I have studied my horses, I have studied photographs, I've made my sketches, and it's a deliberate ploy, a deliberate decision on this occasion not to work from photos. Working from photos is not just useful, it can be quite essential. But at some point, really to be able to understand and perhaps move towards a looser style, we have to make the departure. We have to sort of make a leap of faith. So you need to arm yourselves with sketches and studies. These can be done, as I say, on the internet these days. There's so much photographic reference material available free to us artists. You just have to be careful, of course, that there's no copyright if you're actually copying anything directly, or gain the express or written permission of the photographer if you are going to use their photo, and explain to them exactly how you intend to use the photo. But in this I'm going to explain the how I go about achieving the shape of these horses, and that by releasing ourselves from the constraints of using a photo, in other words, we're able to free up our own ideas. The second we stop relying on a photographic reference, or any other reference given to us for that matter, we have to engage our own ideas, and it's within these ideas that we're able to interpret what we see, and sometimes what we think we see. So it's a bit of a challenge, and my final word of advice is just to do many of these things, perhaps draw them out first of all on scraps of paper. So let's get started. We had a slight diagonal, which meant that the horse's head, if we place the horse's head about here, and I'm going to draw this in quite heavy so you can see it. I want you to think like this. This horse has three shapes to it. It has this sort of narrow shield like this, if you like, okay? An elongated lozenge shape. We have a second shape that does something like this, okay? And that we'll consider to be its neck. And then we have a third shape. And what do I want you to think here is that they're quite similar. The shapes by character are quite similar. Now the third shape is the body of the horse. And if you look at it, all it is a larger version of the neck, okay? The neck comes into the body about here, and the body comes out from the base of the neck about there. Now, all you have to do on top of this is bring a shape like this in, and that will, for now at least, work for its legs. Now that's how you break anything down. You break it down to its simplest form, okay? Instead of, thinking, well, the horse's head up here, spend 2 hours trying to get the horse's head looking right, you have to put the mouth on it down here, the nostrils that are about here. Instead of that, you're always ever just breaking these things down into their most basic shapes. And there it is. The legs come forward like this. Of course, this is just to tell us where the legs are. The legs could well look like that, but I'm guessing when they're in full swing, there'll be the hoof up here of the front leg, and it might look something like that. So just make a note just of how simple this is. There's a lozenge. There's a sort of, how would you pronounce, a tear shape, if you like, okay? There's another rounded, similar shape here, only bigger, coming off the neck. And then the legs, you can imagine that the muscle at the top of this body is something like that. There's a muscle there, there's a muscle there. You know, what always surprises me with horses is just how thin most of, 70% of the leg is. It's such, there's very little on the, Sherry's going to curse me for saying this, but I'm going to refer to the knee area of the horse's leg before it goes down to the hoof. Okay, but there is very little on there other than this huge muscle that comes directly off the body. Now the back legs we don't really have to concern ourselves with, okay? We'll infer that there's a back leg behind there somewhere with a bit of extra paint and detail when we're ready to do that. So let's forget the jockey for the moment. So we've got that sort of gentle vertical line, well, it's off-centre, isn't it? It's just a slight diagonal. Now let's forget the jockey for the moment. Let's put in a little somebody hot on its heels, okay? Another horse here hot on its heels. Notice how the head height of this second horse, because it's behind this one, is slightly lower than this main character. We'll say that this is possibly either the leading horse or the one in, actually we'll put another one here. This will be better for the balance of things. Let's put another one here first. Slightly bigger, slightly higher because it's in front of this one. So this is the leading horse. There's that lozenge for the head. There's the neck shape again. Just repeat it. There's the neck shape. Here's the body shape. Okay. Here's the legs. Coming out, whoops, something like that. Imagine a muscle here, a muscle there. That neck maybe is, so you can make little adjustments. But that's about right mostly. So we said there's a horse here. We can just imagine how much of that we can see. About here, something like that. Now, if you're not keeping up with this drawing, don't worry, folks, because as you know, you'll be able to watch it as many times as you like on the recording. Now, we could leave it at 3 horses. We could go with an even number and say, let's put another horse here. Don't usually like things in even numbers. I prefer to do things in odd numbers, 3s, 5s, 7s. But for the moment, we'll just stick to 4 horses. And I think probably, when we get to putting the paint on this painting, we might sort of suggest, if I pencil them in a little bit here, we might just sort of suggest there's another 2 horses here having their own sort of race. But all the time, what's really important is you remember this angle, because they're leaning into a corner. They're leaning into this curve in the race course that they're coming round. But they will just probably be painted in later. But it's really important to see how parallel those lines are to each other. You could have a horse slightly off this parallel. But you'd have to be really careful as to how you place it. I don't know, maybe if we put one here, something like that, and it didn't quite have the same angle on it. But you're best sticking to these parallel angles like this. Now then, when it comes to the actual jockey, not surprisingly, you're not going to see much of the jockey. So we'll infer that there's a jockey behind by the colour that we use. If you can just see this, because this is a very small detail. I'm just putting a cap. And here's a really neat trick for. If I just put a face there, it would probably get lost against the details of the horse's head that's in front of it. So what I do is I put those spectacles, those dark tinted spectacles that they often wear. Anyway, that should be okay, I hope. So what I was saying is this. If we're suggesting that there's a rider on the back, a jockey on the back, those, let me just show you what I mean here. There are these tinted, almost like large sunglasses that they wear. Imagine that's the cap here. There's the rider, and there's these tinted glasses. So if you use that, it's a really useful way of conveying. So this area here will be a nice colour, the team colour, or whatever you refer to it as the jockeys wear. So the same here. You can, if you think you can see enough of the jockey's head or face, then put those spectacles in. Okay, and I've drawn them in quite heavy there with the pencil. But as I say, you're not going to see a huge amount. Perhaps this jockey here, just leaning outwards ever so slightly, so we'd see his left eye. Something like that. And a bit of the shoulder. The other thing is too, let me show you again. Not that this matters too much to this drawing because we can't see enough of the jockey. But if the jockey's back is halfway up their head like this, because that's the way they sit. And you've got to remember this, that there's the halfway measurement of the head, the face, okay? And their back, their back is quite high up. It's not down here. It's not, they don't race with their head sticking up out of their body. They're hunched up, and their knees are very high, often like this. So I'm sort of giving you an idea of what goes on on top of the horse, on everything other than the horse itself. The knees are often up here. Imagine the top of their leather boots just about there, something like that. And the horse's head, of course, would be something like this. Something like that. So that's what you've got to get into your head. That's what you've got to allow for and accommodate, is how the different shapes are obscured behind the front shapes. So it's quite a difficult one, this, because, again, I would expect this jockey to be leaning over this side of the horse a little bit. So we might, you could argue that to compensate for the weight, the head might actually be over this side. But these are things to consider, folks. Right. So as I say, when it comes to what else is going on in this scene, whether there's the rails down here and there are spectators leaning over the fence here, we can deal with that with paint later. This is, if you're not used to painting horses, let's deal with the horses first. Let's get that done and then worry about how we make it look like a racecourse afterwards. Okay, now I'm picking up the round brush that we put on our list, okay, and I'm going to start with the burnt sienna and just put some out on my palette. Perhaps I'll just show you here. So here's some burnt sienna. And here's some Payne's Grey. So that's burnt sienna, Payne's Grey. And I'm also going to put out a little bit of the cadmium red. There we are. And this calls for a lot of paint. Okay, a lot of paint. So I take my size 6 round brush, and let's start with the burnt sienna. I'm thinking of most of these horses being of that sort of chestnutty sort of colour, but there's a lot of paint. I mean, a lot. Make it a really rich paddling pool. Okay, a lot of paint, quite a bit of water, yes, but a lot of paint. You shouldn't be able to see you shouldn't be able to see through the paint in the central area. If you can see through at this point down to the surface of your palette, it's not strong enough. It's nowhere near strong enough. But I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's Grey to this side of the puddle here. So that's something else worth noting. What I'm doing is keeping one area of this rich puddle the original colour, and when I add the Payne's Grey, it lives over here at the edge. That allows me to go back and forth some of the darker mix when I need it. And I'm going to start down here, the base of this first horse here. Doesn't matter, you could start on this one if you want, but I'm right-handed, so I like to start over on the left and work to the right. Let's now pick up, so I'm not using the puddle, I've just picked up separately a little bit of the lovely cadmium red, and I'm going to mix that in a little bit, okay? And this is so important, this bit, so you don't have one dark colour. Okay, it's not one colour. The dark rich colours down here. Do you remember we said we'd have a sort of muscle at the top of the body here? Well, I'm sort of allowing for it here. Now here's a useful thing to do. You don't have to do this, but it's something I do a lot. I turn the brush around. This is the handle of the brush now. Okay, turn the brush around, and I'll use that to pull this shape down here. Now these two legs that I'm creating, they may get lost, because I might decide that this horse has a slightly different is in a different sort of physical position. What I'm trying to say is it's difficult to explain sometimes. I might sort of say, as I said earlier, that the front leg is really in front of these two legs, and what we're looking at here is either this could be perhaps the front left leg, but this little dot that I'm making here is the hoof of the front right leg. I mean our right, not the horse's right. So, but that's all you need to do for a moment. Just be a little bit disciplined with this and say, well, make sure that this is all nice and dark down the bottom here, because you'd expect this lower part of the horse to be dark. Notice I didn't put anything in the head, okay? But I am now, because I sort of want to be, I want to know, sorry, I want to sort of just do things in this fashion so you can see what I'm doing. Now you can come back into this in a moment if you want. If you know even just a modicum about horses, you'll know that there are recesses in parts of the body. You know, the neck comes down here and sort of peters out in this sort of fashion here, but round about here between those two front legs is often a sort of recess, a hollow. Now we can deal with that. We can think about that later. Do you put the ears in at this point? I don't think so, because, you know, if you did, I'd just flick them out with a dry brush. Don't put the ears in. Imagine, you know how much I go on about people put legs of figures in. When we put figures in our paintings, we make the legs too hard and static, too hard of edge. Same thing for ears. Anything that's flailing around, this is mayhem. You know, the movement in this particular scene is absolute mayhem, and it would take a really good photographer to capture this action and make it look like a still. So they'd have to use really rapid shutter speeds on their cameras and things like this. So you've got to remember that, okay? A lot of this is going to be softened. Not right now, but it will mean softening things. And that goes for the legs on the horses, just as it would the legs on our figures. But for the moment, we can suggest them quite rigidly, but we can always soften them out afterwards. So let's just repeat things now, folks, on the next couple of horses. Now then, let's do this one again. So I'll start with the neck. I prefer to start with the neck for whatever reasons, I can't even tell you. I just think that's a good place to start. And then, because I started down here, if you remember, on the first horse, just to explain what was going on at the top of the legs. And then I'll get to the top of the legs on this horse. I'll go darker again like I did on the first horse, like this. If you're doing this right, folks, you'll have a real rich well, little reservoir of strong paint here at the tops of the legs. I turn my brush around again, which you probably didn't see me do. I turn the brush around and I'm pulling those legs this way. But if you look now that we've got two, can you see this lovely pattern that's forming? It's a message to the eye that, you know, oh, what's going on here? And then suddenly you think, yeah, I'm getting it. It's two horses. It's two horses running at angle. So let's put something in for the horse's head here. Notice I'm leaving a little slither of light in the centre of the horse's head, because that's quite a common pattern in a lot of horses. So I'm not even thinking about the jockey at the moment. Now remember we said we had a horse in between there where my finger is. Well, you really need to start thinking about bringing a bit of blue in for that one because it's that bit further behind. So I'm just putting out, let me just show you, just putting out a little bit of cobalt blue. Could be it, to be honest, that blue, it could be the other one. It could be, what's it called, ultramarine blue. It doesn't really matter. Could even be Payne's grey, to be honest. But it just cools down the colour of this horse that's behind because it's that little bit further away from us. So I'll even put the horse's head in on that one. Horse. So, but let me draw your attention to this for a moment. Can you see I've left a slither of white paper there between these horses, okay? Just there. So, and I'll do the same over here for this horse. Just leaving a slither of white between the two creatures, between the two horses. So it's weaker. There's a bit more water in this horse too, in this horse I'm painting now. But the same thing can happen. You can still drag. You can borrow a bit of paint from the neighbouring horse. Actually, borrow that bit of paint from the neighbouring horse just there, and you can pull the legs of this horse that's behind down, just as we did with this one here. Okay, let's do this horse, and maybe I will just put a very basic suggestion of horses over here as well. Now I'm looking at this thinking, you know, I could get a lot more paint in here, so I'm picking up some cadmium red, going directly in, because this is all still wet, okay, all still very wet. I can go back in with some more Payne's grey, but I'm concentrating the lion's share of this rich paint towards, you know, it's all about above the legs, just the leg area, the top of the legs up here. So let's put in our horse. Now because this one's not as far away as the one over here, but it's not as close as the two in front, this gets something in between. So it gets a slightly warmer colour and a slightly stronger colour than the one that's just poking through the back there. But it gets exactly the same treatment, only in a weaker version. Down come the legs here. As I say, in reality, at the moment, it's unlikely that you'd have 3 or 4 horses in exactly the same leg position. But that's not going to remain. That's just so that we get an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. So we'll change that in a minute. The same down here, it's a bit darker around the base of the legs. And maybe it can be a little bit darker there. Now, before this gets a chance to dry out completely, what we should be doing, I'm going to see if it's dry enough. I might have to speed dry it. But what we should do, don't do this if it's dry. You'll have to re-wet it if it's not still damp. But you should just darken. Let's assume that we've decided that the light's coming from the right-hand side. We therefore expect the neck, not so much the shoulder there, but the neck to be slightly darker on that left side down there. Okay. Just to give it a bit of form. Again, you know, we'll come back to where these... The way we can suggest that these legs are not all in the same position, the same motion, is in a moment. It's when this has all gone dry and we can place hooves. The hooves will be independent shapes. I gave you an example there, if you remember, when we started. The hooves will be an independent shape that goes on that goes on dry paper later, okay? As will the jockeys, the details of the jockeys' heads and faces. But I am just going to I'll show you just how simple these are over here, because they're just that head, neck, body. Always just think 3 shapes, 4 shapes if you include what you do for the legs down here. And that is, you know, if I only presented you with what I'm doing here, folks, you'd say, what's that supposed to be? But because the rest of the scene explains what we're looking at, you don't question what those are. You know that they're just additional horses, but they're out of focus. They're not the ones we're shouting. We're shouting for and egging on in the race. Could even put another one back there a little bit, but it's up to you how many you put in, because I do appreciate that sometimes, but not always, sometimes the more you put in, the more likely you are to sort of lose confidence. The truth is, of course, it's the opposite. I would say to people, I see a lot of people shying away from a potentially complex looking scene, and then they'll perhaps plumb for a much simpler scene. So they'll leave out the amount of horses, or they'll leave out the amount of trees that are in a painting, and they'll say, well, I'd rather do the easy option and just paint one tree in a field. That's actually harder than painting multiple trees, and the simple reason for that is because you only need to get one element of that single tree wrong, and that is your entire painting wrong, fail. If you put multiple things in, people will only look at the best one. So you may have 7 trees and only one of them is really good. That's the one they'll look at. The others will just support. Nobody's going to scrutinize the other trees. So it's actually easier to paint within reason. I'm talking about organic subject matter as opposed to, say, cityscapes and architectural geometry. Then yeah, it can get a little tricky, but it's similar. It's not. I'd always plumb for a more complicated scene if I was learning. So anyway, we'll come back to any further detail, but that's basically our horses. They're done. Okay. Now I've got to be careful because a lot of this is still very, very wet at the top of the legs, and I can make a mess if I forget and put my hand on it. So what I'm going to do while that I could speed dry it, and I might have to. Yeah, let me just take you in even closer for a moment on what I've just done. Oops, wrong way. That's as close as I can get. See if there you can probably see how I've just left the riders and the faces just as a hint behind the horses' heads. So we'll come back into all of that. We will probably put some ears, or the hint of the horse's ears, and maybe even an eye socket. But for the moment, that's the job. That's the main part of it. That's the hardest bit done, folks. Okay, but it is just a case of studying anything, whatever it is you're looking at, studying it and realizing that everything on this planet can be broken down to 2, 3, sometimes just 4 shapes. Honestly, that goes for everything on this planet. No matter how complex you think it is, the trouble is, if you think it's complex, it's because you're looking at the minutiae. You're looking at the fine detail within that shape instead of just looking at its contour edge and saying that's all it is. It's just a line that goes from here around there, it goes over there, it comes back down here. Even 4 horses together like this is one shape, just one shape. Okay, so just going to speed dry this for a moment. So I've just speed dried that. Should be adequate, and I don't mind anything like this. There's a bit of sort of paint moving around. That's fine. That will be used for something else in a moment. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down and into some detail and just paint a little hint of our jockeys. Remember these shades, these sort of I call them sunglasses, and wherever I think I can just squeeze something like that in, and a cap, just the peak of the cap. That alone immediately says, let me just show you, just those couple of marks tell you that, you know, there's a jockey on this horse. I'm not going to see much of this one. I'm going to be careful not to oversize it like I did in my drawing. So I'm not going to follow my drawing. It's too big. The jockey's head is too big. In fact, if I put a couple of dry brush ears on that horse, I don't have to worry about the jockey behind. It suggests there's something sticking out, like a boot or a hand with, you know, holding a crop. They're the tiniest, subtlest of things, of clues. This is very dry brush. This is sticky paint. Another peak cap with just one side of the face. Another one over here. Scale is really important. Remember, it's exactly the same as if we're doing figures. Do not make the heads of your figures too big. Now, you might sort of see what might be the bottom of the boot, something like that, just there. But, you know, I'm sort of thinking, although I shouldn't be thinking about it at this stage, thinking of any sort of leather strap. Is it livery it's referred to? That you might see, but that too will be flailing around. What you don't want to be doing is thinking, oh yeah, you know, I'll put in a leather strap here, and the nose. Is it the? I'm not going to start guessing. I'm not going to start guessing the names of these things, but the sort of strap that comes over the horse's nose here, and the odd nose. You can get away with some of it. But if you think about it, it's all just so manic. It's all fleeting moment. It's a split second that you're freezing this scene. So you can't put in all this detail. And as far as these horses over here, well, they're a much lesser. There's much less detail required over here. Just do something really random. And we can add to those later too if we want. Now it might be worth suggesting, you know, I was saying about basically each of these horses have only got 2 legs at the moment, okay? Not that you'll see all 4, that's the thing. You know, that there are 16 legs somewhere in this shape. There are 16 legs. But really, it would be dreadful if you start to think, oh, I better give the horse behind 4 legs, and I better give this one 4 legs. I better give. It's too fast. It's too blurred. You don't see it. It would be very unrealistic if you think about it. To actually see them, you wouldn't. In real life, you wouldn't see them. So let's suggest that this horse here has. I'm just doing a sort of very dark, this is ultramarine blue, neat, like glue. There's no water in this paint at all. And I'm just putting what I consider to be a hoof-like shape. Let me just show you what that might look like close up. It's like a little round shape with a point to it at the top end, okay? Now we could sort of say slightly weaker because this horse behind is a little bit further back. So I'm just putting some water in this mix. And we might sort of say there's another hoof up here. Because you're not going to see the leg that's behind this hoof. It's coming at you foreshortened, like just as you are looking down the shaft of this paintbrush that I'm holding in my hand. There's the hoof in front of it. You're not going to see that part of the horse's leg that's directly behind it. Now I'm going to put a couple of other suggestions of hooves in various places. Maybe there's one behind there. And look how, as soon as these little dark, and they must be dark, rich paint. If you try putting these hooves in with too weak a mix, it's not going to work. It's simply not going to work. This has to be glue-like in the mix. I quite like that now. That looks like a hoof. So his leg doesn't, as I originally put it in, just to get my eye in, that leg doesn't come right down to there where my brush is pointing to. It actually is, there's a bend in that leg, okay? And horses, if you've ever watched them, they almost plough, they almost dig their hooves as they run. It's almost like a wheel going around in front of the horse all the time. That's what it looks like, and that's what it feels like, and that's what you've got to try and capture. You've got to capture that feeling of this cycling movement. So a couple more perhaps back here, but that's it. So there's no extra legs, one or two maybe, just a hint of something trailing back there. Now, what about the tail? Would you see a flailing tail behind? Because it's out of sight. You might see no more than something like that. Literally, nothing more than something like that. You would then sort of question yourself: was it worth actually putting in the painting? Was anybody going to sort of look at that and think, "Oh, look, it's even got a tail flailing behind"? But it's just really so to keep everything making sense in your head. If that's all that's for, it's no use to the viewer. It'll never be seen. But for you, the painter, it keeps everything. It keeps everything in mind as to what should be in mind when you're dealing with what you're painting. So, anyway, I'm going to take a little break in a moment. It'll give some of this a chance to sort of to dry off. But before I do, I'm just going to show you how we will put some colour perhaps in these jockeys. So one of the colours I had on the list was lime green, and this is if you I mean, this is a great subject if you're into painting colour. If you're a fan of bright colour, then jockeys, riders, horses, just picking up this lime green, and we'll give one of these riders, perhaps the most dominant one. We said that probably that this horse here is the one that's out front, and we'll just give it a little yellow, limey yellow cap. That's all I can see, really. That is all I can see of that jockey. So don't paint any more than that. We'll give his neighbour some cadmium red. Okay, yeah, this one here. So the jockey here is wearing a red kit. Just that's all you can see. Perhaps a little bit on the cap. When those colours are dry, I'll be able to put some sort of suggestion of fleshy colour in the face of the rider itself. But for the moment, because you've got to work that entire area, you want to wait for these colours to dry out a bit, so you don't upset, so the painting of the face doesn't leach into the garments, into the shirts of the riders. Just a little bit strong in here. I can come back if I feel as though those colours are not bright enough by the end of it. I can always come back in, and what I'd probably do, just to make sure it popped out, would be to add a little bit of white gouache to that lime green, and then it will really zing out. I'm going to put a bit of cobalt. I think what this is where, because ultramarine blue is a slightly cleaner colour. By cleaner I mean it's transparent. What we've used so far is cobalt blue, and cobalt blue is very slightly opaque, so I want this to be a bright blue, so I'm better off using a transparent blue, and this is, could use phthalo blue if you prefer, but I put on the list ultramarine blue, and that's good enough. You know, that's going to do the job. So there again, I just see a part of the shoulder of that rider, nothing else. I've got two more riders. Ooh, I've got more heads than horses. 1, 2, 3. I've got an extra head. We'll probably suggest that he's catching a lift. No, we'll just lose him, I think, towards the end of the painting. So run out of ideas for colours here. You have to start thinking of turquoise and think colours like that. So I'm mixing up a little bit of lime green and the ultramarine blue, and this will give me as I say, a sort of turquoisey colour. Now, I think we're going to have this horse's rider here, looking out at this side of the horse. Okay. I'm not sure whether we even... if we just put a colour somewhere near the heads of these distant horses, that's enough. Not going to start thinking about heads and etc. When we get back to this, just to let you know, I think we'll just take a little break. When we get back to this, what you'll see me doing is doing some lift outs, a little bit of lift outs, say off this shoulder like this, to show you that that's an area there where the bone of the shoulder is very close to the surface of the skin, so you'd expect that to catch light, and there's some other areas too. And although we paint the loose style, this is a nod to realism, if you like. It's where we start just helping to give our shapes some form. Okay then, right, well let's get rid of all this pencil stuff for a moment. So how do we make this, now that we've done the sort of tight stuff, how do we make this look like a loose style painting? Now I'm going to stay out now, whereas I was in close for the horses, I'm going to stay out here so you can see the entire piece of paper. The first thing that comes to mind, if we can always go back into the horses, which we probably will after we've done this next stage, which is the loosening up, but we'll come back to them at the end, not now. So I'm going to pick up the 1-inch flat brush, okay, if you can see that there, and I'm cleaning off my palette, and I'm going to pick up some clean cobalt blue rather than use that. It's got a bit contaminated. Got a little bit of cobalt. And what I want you to do with this is really quite simple. Take your brush, land it up here, and remember the angle on the horses, keep that uppermost for the moment. I'm going to put in this sort of sky. It's because everything is moving and there's this crazy speed to everything that's going to follow the movement that's already in the painting. So when you get over here, it might just go that way a little bit. And that way we suggest that everything is all about the riders and the horses, okay? That already gives it a more contemporary look. Hope you can see that, because the strength of the paint, I don't want to overdo the strength of the paint because it would spoil the painting. If I just put the odd extra strong brush mark in, I think you'll see what it is I'm doing there. So imagine, it's almost as though every brush stroke is pointing towards the horses. But when we get to the foreground, we're going to do something quite different. Let me just clean this brush up a second. I'm going to pick up the number 6 brush, and the blue that we have on the go here, I'm going to add the lime green to it, okay? And a little bit of the cadmium yellow that we put on the list. Now there was also raw sienna on the list, but it's really there's a standby. If I feel as though I need it, I'll use it and I'll let you know that I'm using it. But sometimes if you need a very quick, slightly diffused yellow, raw sienna can come to your assistance at short notice. But there's no panic here. I'm just picking up a little bit of slightly dirtier paint off the side there, and I'm just making a naturalish looking green. Now I'm just going to tap a lot of texture in this foreground. So now this texture can go right up in front of the horses. Don't be precious about where this lands. Yes, it's mainly for the foreground, but it doesn't matter if if you're spattering up against the horses as well. What I'm trying to create here is just this turf and grass and everything going up into the air. You can even deliberately, let's just put some up into the sky in places here, just about here, this area here. Okay, now then, you cannot use one colour on its own. Now this is where the raw sienna might help, but I'm going to use burnt sienna into the existing mix, and that changes the green for me, okay? A little bit more of the lime green. So originally it was lime green and cadmium yellow, and I did a bit of spattering with those two colours. Then I'm changing this green by adding, sorry, let me show you in the camera. The first spattering was done with lime green and cadmium yellow, okay? Then I decided that one colour wasn't enough, so I picked up a little bit of burnt sienna into that mix, put a little bit more green in there perhaps, and then that gives me another green, a warmer green as it happens. In a moment I'll probably just go for some clean cadmium yellow to suggest that there's some light, sunlight on this track. So let's pick up a little bit of the cadmium yellow on its own and put something a little brighter in places. That sort of breathes a bit of sunshine into the scene. So I'm picking it up, rolling the brush around, holding the brush between middle finger and thumb very loose, and I'm just tapping with the index finger down on top of the brush like this. With a bit of practice you'll get that very easily. Okay, so now I'm going to do, if you spatter with a bit of white gouache, you can also spatter with water of course, but you've seen me do this many times in the past. Spatter with a bit of water onto dry paint, onto the dried out areas, and when you just leave them on there a little bit longer, and when you lift them off you end up with a texture. Show you what I mean there. Depends on how dry that paint is that you're tapping onto. So that's another way of texturing your surfaces. Also the white gouache, of course. I'll just use a bit of white gouache. Same trick. What I do with the white gouache is I dunk this brush in water, shake most of the water out, I just tap most of the water out, and then poke the fibres of that brush into the white gouache and tap that white paint in front of the horses, over the horses, deliberately targeting the horses. Okay. Now what about suggesting there may be a couple of figures over here leaning over the railings? Let's just pick up a little bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. So, and we'll sort of say a bit of an angle down here because it's a little side of the track that's moving away from us. Let's get some, I've forgotten about the faces, a little bit of warmth in the figures' faces. Just there, there and there. There's another horse behind there, which we might have to put some extra legs in there so that the 5 heads, the five-headed horses of the apocalypse, or whatever, should make more sense. So these are a little bit sort of, These are sort of off the ground, aren't they, these horses back here? So we're going to have to bring ground up to their level, otherwise it's going to look like they're flying, literally flying. And we need to probably just establish those a little better now. Just going a little stronger where we'd expect the shadow of their undersides of the horses to be. Maybe there's some bright garments on the figures, but you know, that's a cadmium red, and we can't leave it sort of that bright. It wouldn't be that bright, even though, you know, it's local colour. You know the thing about local colour? Local colour is what the colour of the object is. If a green apple is green, a red apple is red. That's what we refer to as its local colour. But all colours get less or desaturated the further they are away from us. So I'd put the cadmium red in there, but I'd put something like a very weak bit of green on top of that red. What else? How else can we develop this painting? I'm sort of leaving the foreground like it is for the moment, but I'd probably just scrub or take a line or something through there in a moment when it's had a chance to dry off a bit more. If I pick up a rigger brush, these places tend to have, of course, light stanchions, spotlights. So I'm just picking up a bit of cobalt blue, and why don't we just sort of hint upon this is still wet up here, but I don't think it, you know, it's not, doesn't do anything untoward to paint wet into wet up here. If there's motion, as I keep saying, then a lot of these shapes are going to be diffused. Could be other things at the side here, things you'd expect to find at the edge of a race course, little directional signs for spectators to adhere to, whatever. I don't think we need much over here. You know, if this really is a busy sort of scene, then we will need to diffuse that area there a little bit. I just lost the brush I need to do it with. Yeah, sorry, a little bit of pale weak blue. Perhaps there's a pavilion building over here. Maybe it comes into the back of those horses there a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of detail, but if I'm not careful, I'll just sort of overdo those things. Take some lines through here. Imagine this ground, some directional lines in the ground in front of us, like this. And now I'm just probably going to come back to the horses and see how we can just make those really stand out a little bit more than they are now. Now, as that sky that I put in has dried off, you can see that it's left a really hard edge. That's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I would probably expect a little bit more softness. So this sort of synthetic-y brush that I'm using at the moment will allow me to scrub out some of that hardness, but still keep the basic shape to the edge. Okay, let's pick up a little bit of, let's diffuse some of the texture, just some of the texture in places. Perhaps here like this, still keeping that sense of movement coming through here. Something through the back there, because it didn't look right being just white paper at the back there. We just got to continue the story a bit behind that at that level. And now I'm just going to put some shadowy type colour at the base of these horses. Let's assume, as we said earlier, perhaps the light is coming from this direction. I'm just picking up ultramarine blue and a bit of a bit of cadmium red. So that was ultramarine blue, cadmium red. Makes a sort of plummy, slightly diffused purple colour. And this is the size 6 brush. What we're going to do here is just suggest some shadow through in and around these horses. Maybe shadows coming across from something over here, which helps tie the horizontal across. And although this shadow I wouldn't expect that shadow there to be thrown quite as far as this off these riders, but actually it's not far off. It probably would, the shadow probably would end about there somewhere. But sometimes I elongate those shadows anyway, just for effect. And I think really we're there. So I'm looking at, if I put the mount around this painting for a moment, by putting the mount around it, isolates this painting from all the paraphernalia and rubbishy stuff around the painting. So it'll isolate it and let me see it in a clearer fashion. Okay. So, you know, it's pretty obvious where the focal point is, isn't it? It's right here. It's somewhere around here probably. The horse's head here. Perhaps we can darken a little bit more of this front horse around here somewhere. That's just ultramarine blue and burnt sienna again, only in a stronger dark mix. Couple of extra dark spots here and there. Yeah, I think it probably needs a bit of extra spatter, a darker spatter, so it shows off against the pale green spattering that we did earlier. So I'll just load this up with something more, with a greater content of blue in it. And we'll have some of this turf flying around in a more random fashion. That's better. And you can go, you know, you can sort of say, well, I'd rather see some shadow between some of these shapes, some darker tones between some of these shapes, I should say, really. Just showing them off a bit better. But I think we'll leave it at that. There'll be things to erase. There'll be a bit of pencil work around here when it's all dry to erase. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you feel like that was sort of beneficial. You've gained something out of that. I'll put the mount back around it again for a moment. So just to recap, we went straight for the business end. We went straight into the detail, establishing the shapes of the horses. Okay, 3 shapes: head, neck, body, and then the legs are pulled out by use of moving the paint around with the handle of the brush. Mostly we let that sort of sink into the paper. It was very strong paint. Then we looked at some small details, a couple of hooves, a couple of extra details around the leg areas, the faces of some of those riders. And I'm just looking at them now. They may require just softening down a little bit. I'm just going to show you what I mean. I take a little flat brush here to come in useful. If I put in a little bit of white in some of those colours, it makes them look a little more natural. You could just use water. You could just take a damp brush and do the same thing. But I feel as though the white gouache does a sort of quicker, less fuss answer to that. So yeah, assuming the painting is dry, I would just erase the pencil work and then it's a finished job. Thanks for watching, and please remember to hit the subscribe button. If you want notifications, automatic notifications as and when I upload new videos, then please remember also just to hit that little bell button. And thanks for watching.